In this episode of the Ultradilute podcast, I had the pleasure of speaking with my former classmate, Kristina Jermain of North Star Homeopathy. She was in the same full-time program that I was in and has just opened her own practice in Huntsville, Alabama, although seeing patients online all over the country. And it was really nice to connect now on the other side of our coursework and our clinical supervision to sort of just take a temperature check on where we're at in launching our own practice. I think it's a fascinating time to be involved in homeopathy as there's greater awareness and the potential for it to grow into a more mainstream practice. And I think that's something that both Kristina and I are very committed to helping support. So I hope you enjoy this episode and get to hear from someone who has gone through a similar program as mine and who's coming to homeopathy for different reasons, but found it to be essentially where she wants to put her life focus going forward after a career as an educator. So thanks for listening, and I hope you enjoy our conversation. Kristina Jermain, it's really good to see you. It's been a few months, and I really appreciate you coming onto the podcast today and taking a few minutes to talk about what it looks like to be starting your own homeopathy practice, having just graduated from Academy of Homeopathy Education. And I'd like to just hear from you, like how would you introduce yourself these days?
Oh my gosh. That's a loaded question. Well, I now am introducing myself as a homeopath. I've been, in my practice for just a month now, after having been in supervision for the last several months. So I'm a homeopath, I'm a mom, I'm a former educator. Um, and I'm just getting my practice up and running and helping those people out there who need help.
Yeah. And I really am so glad to talk to you today because I've enjoyed so much getting to know you over the last few years as a colleague and as a fellow student in Academy of Homeopathy Education. And you've inspired me and others in our cohort with just the way that you've developed your practice with such care. For people listening, Kristina and I both went to school in the full-time program over the last couple of years at Academy of Homeopathy Education. And I just wanted to chat with you today to just ask a few question to sort of see, where you're at, but also to just allow listeners the opportunity to get a sense of what it's like to be a student, to learn homeopathy, to essentially open doors to new career paths, particularly a little later in life. I just welcome this opportunity to just hear from you and talk about some of those things. And maybe to start, could you share, how did you come to homeopathy? How did you discover it? Was it something you've always loved? Is it something that you found out about? I would just love to hear, that story from your perspective.
Sure. Well, thank you for that very nice introduction, by the way. That was very flattering. And yeah, so I didn't always know about homeopathy. I discovered it, it started because my oldest child, she's 11 now. And when she was about 14 months, she suddenly lost all of her language and her social skills, like pretty much overnight. And and about a year after that, she was diagnosed with severe autism. Now, when they diagnose autism, they do it on levels. It's 1, 2, or 3, and 3 being the most severe. So she'd be a level 3. But the process of getting there was really exhausting. And when we finally had the diagnosis, the psychologist basically said, "Yep, she's got autism. Good luck," and just kind of sent us out. And we didn't know what to do. There wasn't much guidance. Her pediatrician didn't really have answers either. And I was just kind of left wondering how my child could be so, quote unquote, normal and developing normally one day and then so different the next day with no explanation. And so I just kind of slipped into like a super sleuth mom mode, and I looked everywhere for answers, and I got her into traditional therapies for autism, and then just started exploring different approaches. And so I first encountered homeopathy through a non-classical homeopath, and so there were a bunch of detox protocols, which were messy and incredibly aggravating. And I learned later it's because, that's not really how homeopathy is intended to be practiced. And detoxes often force a process that's not ready to be moved, and they're not gentle, and they're not individualized, and and they're very high potencies, and all of these things that are set up to create an aggravation. But at the same time, I could tell that something was happening. I saw some changes. She had, just one example, she had chronic diarrhea, and then by the end of, one of the protocols, it was completely healed. So I could tell that something was happening, and that we were actually, touching something, but the benefits were not outweighing the costs. And then about 4 or 5 months after she was diagnosed with autism, she developed PANS, which is Pediatric Acute-onset Neuropsychiatric Symptom. PANDAS falls under that umbrella. That's triggered by strep, but PANS is triggered by, other things. And her triggers were mold exposure and a tick bite. And again, she changed overnight. And at the time, there wasn't a lot that was known about PANS. It was kind of a controversial diagnosis, and so nobody would diagnose it, and just told me that, it's just that her autism was getting worse. But it didn't sit right with me, because she was a pretty calm kid and a happy kid. And then all of a sudden she wasn't. It was just like rage and screaming all day, every day. And sometimes, waking up during the middle of the night, screaming. And because it's autoimmune, and it causes the body to attack the brain. So she's just, she's in a lot of pain. And her homeopath that I was working with at the time couldn't fully help, and nobody in the allopathic medical world was really helping. And so I took a break from homeopathy and did a little bit more research, because I knew there was something there, but I just hadn't found the right path yet. And then eventually I found a more classical homeopath. And within the very first month, her most severe symptoms were relieved. I mean, she was back to being her happy self. She had stopped screaming. And it was life-changing for her and the whole family. But the way that practitioner, who was actually a naturopath and not a certified homeopath, the way that she practiced also caused a lot of aggravations. And so again, the benefits didn't really outweigh the costs. And when I started studying at AHE, that's when I realized that, oh my goodness, this is not true classical homeopathy as Hahnemann intended. And we know that classical homeopathy is all about gentleness and precision. And so I switched to an AHE grad at that point. That was a couple of years ago. And she's had the smoothest, most balanced progress we've ever had since then. And so it's really her journey and my journey with her, and my desire to help her and to understand her and what's going on with her. That's what brought me into homeopathy. And so now it's just been my life's next calling.
Yeah. Yeah. I really appreciate that story. And because I think it touches on so many things about homeopathy in 2025, including its incredible ability to heal the problems that contemporary life, introduces, and at the same time raises questions around what it means to be a homeopath, or what it means to practice homeopathy as it was intended. And your story just, captures so many of those elements. And, I wonder, I mean, I don't know about you, but for me, seeing homeopathy function in my own life. Initially, actually, it was with my partner before I became introduced to it myself. And luckily, he worked with someone that was a classical homeopath who, knew what they were doing. But that was kind of a stroke of luck in some ways. And it was really surprising for me to learn how many people are practicing things that they call homeopathy that are of a questionable nature. I don't know how else to put it. And that's been kind of a tough pill to swallow, to just kind of get a sense of the lay of the land in that regard. But was that surprising to you? I mean, to just kind of understand the scale of people, or the playing field that we're entering. How do you feel about that? And sort of, did it come as a surprise to you as you began to see kind of how widespread, some of these practices are that are not necessarily even homeopathy?
Yes, it did surprise me, and it surprised me also that, I learned that people can call themselves homeopaths with very little training from, just a weekend seminar that's not from an accredited institution and doesn't have, this rigorous program that you and I just went
Mm-hmm.
through. And one of the most surprising things to me is that homeopathy is a lot more complicated than it seems. It's
Yeah.
not just a simple detox protocol where everybody gets the same protocol for 8 weeks and then you're done, and there's no real follow up, or there's no real um, monitoring from a homeopath.
Yeah.
And so, yes, it was surprising to me. And it was even surprising to me that, the naturopath that we saw, who was practicing quote unquote classical homeopathy, it was one remedy at a time, which we know is one of the principles of classical homeopathy, but um, it did not follow the law of minimum dose.
Hmm.
And so, because, my daughter was given repeated potencies, often repeated remedies, often in very high potencies, it began to make sense to me why she did okay when she was taking, 30C, for example. But then her homeopath would move through potencies and she'd get up to 10M and she'd be taking that daily.
Wow.
And, now I know why she was aggravating, because that's not how it's intended to be practiced. And I don't think we should be so rigid and inflexible and dogmatic to think that this is the only way to do it at
Right.
all times. I think we need some flexibility, especially in the modern world and as things change and evolve. But we also have, 2 centuries worth of clinical practice and evidence that shows us that this way of practicing works, and this way of practicing leads to lasting healing, where, you don't have to take remedies forever, you don't have to
Mm-hmm.
take medication forever, you don't have to take supplements forever. You just take your remedy for your time as your homeopath follows your case, and then your symptoms are resolved. But it's really important to follow some of those principles,
Yeah.
especially that law of minimum dose.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and I think that also was very surprising to me, was just to learn. I mean, this is powerful medicine, and if you are not following a set procedure and a set way of following someone's pattern of healing, and you start applying protocols or daily high doses or those sorts of things, it really it produces results that are uh, quite powerful in a way that can be detrimental, and
Yes.
and I think that's just something that is worth acknowledging sometimes, that this is real medicine, and it causes real effects, and as you just said, I mean, there's over 200 years of history of people understanding how it can be helpful, and how to best use it for that purpose. And I wonder, going into the field now as a new practitioner, having opened your clinic last month, how are you sort of seeing the field as a whole in terms of kind of where you can fit in and perhaps, kind of help broaden understanding around the principles of homeopathy as they were intended.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think homeopathy is at such an interesting point right now because, on the one hand, it's still very misunderstood. There's a lot of misinformation out there. There's a lot of questionable ways of practicing, as we were discussing, and it's also so often dismissed, as placebo in the allopathic world. But on the other hand, more and more people are turning to it
Yeah.
as they're searching for deeper, gentler, and permanent ways to heal, um, and approaches that really address the whole person, not just the separate diagnoses that they may have. And they're disenchanted with the medical system because they get, what, 7 or 8 minutes with their physician, and if they've got something wrong with their thyroid, they send them to one person. If there's something wrong with their kidney, they go to another person. It's not really, addressing the whole person, where that's, where the beauty of homeopathy is that we look at the totality of symptoms. And then, the physician just prescribes the same medication for everyone, and you're on that medication for life because it's not resolving the issue. So when you get your hour and a half or your 2 hours with your homeopath, it's just such a different experience. And, I always say that my job as a homeopath is always to work myself out of a job, to follow Hahnemann's very first aphorism, which is that the healer's highest and only calling is to make the sick healthy. And I want to get my clients into such a solid state of health that they don't need me
Yeah.
anymore. And so I hope that as more people turn to homeopathy, as they have been doing, and realize that, it really works well, and they begin to spread the word. And, that's how we get a lot of our referrals, is word of mouth. I hope that the field will move toward greater integration and be rightfully restored alongside other healing modalities, and also become more accessible
Yeah.
to people who are looking for answers. And then it can also ease the burden that's currently overwhelming the healthcare system,
Yeah.
because I don't blame the physicians for taking 7 or 8 minutes, because that's all they have. But we have the luxury of time. And so it's such a beautiful modality that can work alongside other modalities really well. So that's where I hope,
Yeah.
to see it going.
I agree. And, I was looking at the Homeopathy Research Institute website the other day, and they have a new video and where they're sort of explaining how they see the field of research, going into the future around homeopathy. And clearly there's so little funding for research in homeopathy, but yet the positive efficacy of homeopathy is shown over and over again in study after study in peer-reviewed journals. And so there's such a promise for that to grow, and for there to be broader recognition of the field, and for it to become more mainstream. And and in this video, one of the presenters made the comment that really stuck with me, which was, they just want homeopathy to be drama free, like to just be another to just be like another option that people can take. And if you choose to do that, it should be available to you without a lot of all of the emotion, or kind of all of the feelings that seem to just be so imbued in complementary medicine as a whole, and I think specifically homeopathy, for whatever reason.
Right.
And I found that to just be such a nice kind of encapsulation of, I think, kind of what you're saying, and sort of where I would love to see things go as well, which is just let it just do its job, and let people who are interested in it be able to come to it without a lot of roadblocks, or a lot of unnecessary kind of emotion around it, and have it sit alongside conventional medicine, and support areas that conventional medicine maybe is not so good at, or vice versa. I guess kind of going on a slightly different route, thinking back to our school days, what did you find most surprising to you about being a student?
Yeah, it was interesting for me because, I used to be a teacher, and to be sitting on the other side of the table again
Yeah.
was absolutely interesting. But I think, one of the things that I was really able to appreciate about AHE is the quality of the curriculum, um, and, the strength and the diversity. And so what really surprised me, once we started getting in and learning, is that, you know, homeopathy is a complete system of medicine.
Mm-hmm.
So it's got
Yep.
its own theory and philosophy. And so learning about all of that, the history, the theory, and the philosophy, and how it evolved, from 200 years ago to now, and really having that background and setting homeopathy in its historical context was just really helpful to understand, how it started, and then really how it started to stray
Mm-hmm.
from the original path, with some people choosing different ways of practicing it, and how all of that context is just so important in understanding how to appropriately practice homeopathy today. And another thing I wanted to mention is that, we in our program, we're also trained in health sciences.
Right.
And I think that's important, that we're able to recognize the limitations that homeopathy might have in a
Yeah.
case, and we can make an appropriate referral, um, if necessary. Whereas, some of these weekend seminar people don't have that depth of training. And so I just think that's really important, to be a safe practitioner.
Yep.
And so I also really appreciated that about our education.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that, and I couldn't agree with you more. I think that, well, two things. I think the quality of the curriculum, I thought was extraordinary, and was extraordinarily thorough in the sense that it shows where homeopathy originated, and as you said, also has shifted over time. And then yeah, that point of understanding larger conventional practice, and where the boundaries of homeopathy might sit within or around that, was just it seems like such a necessary component of being a health practitioner. We've talked a little bit about where we'd like to see the field go, and sort of how people who come from the kind of training that we do are working towards that. And I wonder, having the personal experience that you had with homeopathy and learning it in this rigorous manner, at what point did you realize that you wanted to be a professional practitioner yourself?
Well, what really drove me to practice professionally was really my own journey as a mother, and, as a parent. Having a child who's suffering is incredibly difficult to witness. Um, but, what I realized is that it's not just the child who suffers, it's the whole family.
Mm-hmm.
And when you begin to heal with homeopathy, just one person in the family, it changes the whole energy of the family, changes the whole family dynamic. Um, but, before that happens, so often it's the mothers who carry the weight the heaviest. They're the ones searching late at night for answers. They're driving the kids to the appointments. They're holding it all together, and yet they put themselves last every single time. And I'm a testament to this. My own health suffered. It really went downhill during my daughter's most severe PANS symptoms, because it was just so incredibly stressful, and I didn't take care of myself. Um, but I put myself last because, my kids are always first. But once she began to shift, that's when I realized, okay, I've gotten stuck too, and I need help too.
Hmm.
And so I began to see a homeopath myself. And then, everything shifted for me, both physically and mentally and emotionally. And so through that journey, I realized there's a way not only to help children like my own, but also to bring relief to the parents. And, I talk about the mom a lot because the mom does a lot of the stuff. And that's, that's my experience, is that I have mothers coming to me. Um, but the dad is also there often on the back burner. And it's often more difficult for the dad to talk about the stress that it's put on him.
Mm-hmm.
But when the parents and the mother sees herself, she feels seen and she feels supported and cared for, even if it's not her own consultation. She is sitting with a homeopath for an hour and a half or 2 hours, and her child's story is being heard in a way that it's never been heard before. um, and then when she feels like she's supported and cared for, then she can show up in a whole new way in her family. And the dad can do this too, if he decides that he wants to, to put himself on the front burner.
Mm-hmm.
But that's really what made me want to turn this into more than just something I was doing for my own family. It made me want to devote myself to helping other families and help them find that same hope and healing. And, I don't limit my practice to those types of kids, or families, but I think that they will naturally be drawn to me because of my history and my experience.
Yeah. Yeah, I hear you. And have you had the experience where you've seen people in conversation with you or consultation with you make connections in their own health just from talking to you, which has been really interesting for me to see also, where they're the ones living, they're in their bodies, yet they'll make a connection between a physical symptom or an emotional symptom that they wouldn't have otherwise, until they have that space to actually talk about it, which I find fascinating. And
It is fascinating. And it's really cool to watch. Like, there's just been a lot of light bulb moments in my consultations where, they just get so much clarity. And, we always hear in school that the homeopath is the first remedy. And it's just really so true, because all of these realizations come to light during that first consultation.
I know. And, it's funny. I remember the first time I heard that in class, where someone, said that the consultation with the homeopath is the beginning of healing. And I remember, that first year I thought to myself, oh, that's just some, that's just some like
Woo-woo.
some woo-woo happy talk, whatever. And, but I have completely changed my tune, because I've seen it multiple times now, and it's really interesting to see. And going into this, did you know that you really wanted to focus on working particularly, not limited to, but particularly with families and those kinds of situations? Or is that something that evolved over time once you began studying?
Um, I mean, I guess that was probably at the forefront of my mind, just because that was my experience. But I've also, so I do have a couple of PANS clients, but interestingly, I have a lot of women who are, in a certain stage in life where they're going through perimenopause, and are just, and it's not going smoothly for them, and they're just having a lot of hormone imbalance. So I do get a lot of those clients. And it's just been so nice to see the relief that it brings to them, because, like I was saying earlier, they can show up to their families or to their jobs or to, their other friendships or relationships, as a whole different person. So, um, it's that's just the kind of client that I've gotten a lot recently. But if I'm of course open to helping anybody.
Mm-hmm.
But I just feel like that's where we have a lot of need right now.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's really interesting to hear that you're seeing kind of a similar pattern of it within the clients that are coming to you, and I sometimes wonder if that happens for a lot of homeopaths, where because I even in myself going through clinical supervision, just noticed that there were certain issues that sort of just kept appearing in the people that I was working with, and I'm very curious how long that continues, or is it,
Right.
and before I hit record earlier, we were joking a little bit about how cool it would be to maybe do like an annual check-in and just see how our practices are progressing over time. And I sort of love
Yes.
that idea, just to see what kind of clients are you seeing now, or
Yeah,
and what's
definitely.
how are things emerging. And something else that's been very interesting to see is how clients will, and I've noticed this in myself too, to some degree, and loved ones who have used homeopathy. But there is a real tendency to want to forget the symptoms that maybe you presented at the intake, or at the beginning of the consultation. And it's kind of beautiful to sort of see when people don't remember specifically what they very clearly had presented, when you first talked to them about, very specific symptoms, and you'll sort of raise it and be like, "Hey, is that still bothering you?" Be like, "Oh, I hadn't even thought about that," or,
Yes.
that it's that act of forgetting, I think, is sometimes related to health, like the ability, almost like a luxury of the ability to forget. And it's
Absolutely.
and it's just it's lovely to see, but there are those moments where you're like, "Oh, we did talk about this. I'm not I'm not making this up. I actually, took the notes." And that's something that you've seen as well.
Yes, I
Yeah.
I have, because I'll ask, especially with these female clients, a lot of them have headaches, and they have all different types of headaches. They present totally differently. And as a side note, that's just the beauty of homeopathy, is where, if you have migraines and you go to your doctor, there's like three medications that they can give you, but we've got 8,000 things to choose from,
That's right.
So it's really the beauty of being able to individualize it to the type of headache. One client gets a left-sided headache behind her eye, and then another one um, gets, a stabbing pain in the back of her head. And so, they're just all very different. And so, often, those headaches are one of the first things to resolve. And so, 3 or 4 months down the line, I'll say, like, did you get a headache before your period this month? And they'll say, oh my gosh, I forgot that I used to get those.
Yeah.
No, I haven't had one in months.
Right.
So it's really lovely to see, to see people forget how much they were suffering
Yeah.
prior to homeopathy,
Yeah.
because it's just, I always tell people that I hope one day that you can forget this ever happened to you,
Yeah.
really,
Right. Right.
because it
Yeah.
is, it's just such a cool thing.
Yeah. That's so fascinating. And it is really, it's really interesting to see. And then to also kind of notice just the kind of energy, for lack of a better word, that what people will bring to a follow-up versus, kind of how they're presenting in the intake. And you can kind of just see, like, wow, you are a different person than you were 3 months
Yes,
ago. Even,
right.
and and I find that really gratifying, and really just a beautiful thing.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah. And and that also opens the door to a question that I know on your Instagram the other day you were addressing, and I thought provided some really lovely analogies into to kind of how to answer this question. But when we talk about these stories of how we've seen it be successful, a question that comes up is, how does it do this? What is it doing? How does it work? And I think there are so many unknowns around that question. But I wonder, how do you answer that when people ask you?
Yeah, so I tell them that it's really all about resonance. And the two analogies that I used the other day were, the first was out of a tuning fork. So when you strike it, it begins to vibrate, it emits sound waves. And if there's a nearby tuning fork that is on the same frequency, it will also begin to vibrate and emit sound waves. And we call that resonance. And we know that things can resonate without ever physically touching. And what's really cool about homeopathic remedies is they themselves, introduce a resonance, but it's your body that's doing the work.
That's right.
So that was
Yeah.
another surprising thing to me, is that the remedies don't really do much of the work. They just stimulate a process that had been stuck.
Mm-hmm.
And so when something resonates within you, then you begin to vibrate and you begin to move, and where your body was stuck before begins to get into motion again, and then resolve those symptoms
Yeah.
itself. It just needed a little nudge to do it, because
Yeah.
we get stuck for whatever reason.
Yeah. I'm also reminded of the fact that humans were taking willow bark as an early form of aspirin thousands of years ago, before anyone had a sense of how quote unquote it worked. And it wasn't until 1971 that there was even a kind of a scientific understanding of the mechanics of aspirin, and this is after thousands of years of having used it. And I think that's just one example. And I think in terms of what we see and empirically observe, that the resonance that you're describing is exactly, what's happening, and that it does help the body get unstuck in a way that it was stuck. And do you think that there's going to be a day down the road when uh, when scientists uncover something that's currently not known, and then everyone will be like, "Oh, of course that's how homeopathy was working." Do you see that day coming?
I hope so,
Yeah.
because I think, we're at a point where we really need to start thinking out of the box. Because if we look at, traditional clinical trials that test traditional medicines, it's always tested on a biochemical level.
Mm-hmm.
And so when they begin to test homeopathy or homeopathic remedies on that same process, they work on two completely different processes. So a homeopathic remedy is not going to work in a biochemical trial just the same way as a medication wouldn't perform well, in a homeopathy trial, or in a physics trial, or
Mm-hmm.
something, a frequency trial.
Mm-hmm.
So, I hope so. I mean, science is always expanding, and that's the whole point, is that we learn and we discover new things every day. I just hope that it gets the attention and the funding that I
Yeah.
really think it deserves.
I think that funding issue is one that I am hopeful. I'm not sure what the path is to that, but I'm completely convinced that if there were proper funding for research in homeopathy, I think we could make up a lot of ground really quickly, especially these days. There's such an openness to, and such a need for, as you alluded to earlier, for alternative ways to tackle the enormous health problems that we face in the world right now. And if you're seeing efficacy, and you see patients getting better and feeling better, why wouldn't you just want to fund that?
Right.
It seems so obvious to me, but
Yes. And I thought you made a really good point in your reel the other day, where, the way that medications perform and the way that homeopathic remedies perform in trials is really comparable. I mean,
absolutely.
they're almost equal,
Hmm.
in their efficacy. So exactly what you said. Why wouldn't you want to
Yeah.
fund something that is just as effective as something else?
Yeah, yeah, it doesn't. It's science. It doesn't need to be in the realm of feelings or presumptions. If I think just going in with an open mind and being like, hey, like let's explore this, or let's try to learn more or make it more available. Especially when you see that it's not producing anything close to the kinds of side effects that you see in conventional medicine. I think the thing that concerns me about that is I feel like it's such a systemic issue, that it's more than just a few people can solve. I feel,
Right.
and that's where I have concern about the ability to get more support for it. But I don't know. Enough people start seeing the benefits in their own lives, and then suddenly things can change. So
Yeah.
That's certainly something that I would love to see. While we're on the topic of those 8,000 remedies, um, and this is a silly question because it, but luckily I warned you in advance that I was going to ask. But do you have a favorite remedy?
So I always hesitate to name remedies because I'm afraid people will like jump out
Yeah,
there and try it,
yeah,
without consulting with a
exactly. I
homeopath and
know.
really understanding how it works. And then, they try it and it doesn't work because it's not resonating. And then they say, well, homeopathy doesn't
Yeah,
work.
yeah.
But I have to say that I have a soft spot for lachesis. And that is because that was the very first remedy that I recommended for my very first client under supervision.
Uh huh.
And it just changed his whole life. And in the best way possible.
Mm-hmm.
He's been with me for over a year now. He followed me into my private practice after my supervision was over. And I just loved watching the way this remedy resolved some of his biggest obstacles that,
Mm-hmm.
really got in the way of him, living his life. And so just to see those things resolve and he's, able to do what he wants to do um and he is actually just finished his remedy. So, he came to the end of it and now we're just going to take a little pause and see where things go and,
Mm-hmm.
what to do next.
Mm-hmm.
But it was so cool for me to have like a success right
Yeah.
away. And so I just have a soft spot for lachesis. And
Yeah.
I love snake remedies in general because, people tend to have a fear of snakes and that like this remedy is made out of what.
Right.
But it's just they're such beautiful remedies for so many different
Yeah.
conditions. So, now whenever I go out and for a hike or whatever, and I'll see a timber rattlesnake, I'm like, oh,
Hey.
there's a remedy made from that.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, so lachesis, I've just got a soft spot for it.
Oh, I love it. That's such a great story, and for all the right reasons. And I know, isn't that it's so invigorating when you just see the change that a remedy can make, and as you pointed out, when it resonates. Because if you gave
Yes.
lachesis to someone with whom that wasn't resonant, then that we wouldn't see the success that you're describing. But yeah, that's so cool. What's kind of upcoming for you? Like, what are you now that you are deeply embedded in the process and the practice itself, and as you grow your own clinic and your own practice, how are you thinking about development now for yourself? I think you're someone who's going to you're going to continue developing.
Yeah.
And so what's next for you in that regard?
Um, that's a good question. I think for now I'm just kind of taking a breath, but I mean, I really, I see my role as helping to carry, my vision of homeopathy forward,
Mm-hmm.
that it's going to be an increasingly important and recognized healing modality. And so, I'm obviously going to keep working for my clients and bringing in more people and helping them, get back to a better state of health. But I also think that, just education about homeopathy is really important. So I don't exactly know what form that's going to take now. I mean, I post on my Instagram, I do these
Mm-hmm.
weekly homeopathy walk and talks where I
Mm-hmm.
just take a question that people have about homeopathy and just talk about it for 3 minutes. And what I find is that I could say so much more. It's really hard to condense that into 3 minutes. And so I want to find some sort of forum where I can say more about it. And I'll probably start with just community education, just sponsoring an education night at my local health co-op or
Mm-hmm.
something. Um, and then, see how it evolves from there. But, I'm interested in, all of these conferences and further continuing education opportunities, just because there's always so much new information
Mm-hmm.
coming out, and particularly about research. So,
Yes. Yes.
I really hope to keep up on that too.
Yeah, and I just learned about a conference right before the research conference in Connecticut at the Harvard Medical School. It's not a homeopathy conference, but I wonder what your thought is on this. I feel like it should have a homeopathy component because it's a whole conference on essentially mind, consciousness, and the body. I mean, they have, doctors who are looking at emotional health and physical health and how those two things relate. And I was looking at the lineup and I was like, oh, there really should be a homeopath speaking at this because this is exactly, our comfort zone in many ways. And it just got me thinking that one of the things I would also love to see in the field is just more kind of cross pollination between some of these emerging areas of study that are getting more and more traction, I think, in the conventional world of research, and
Yes.
and then how can we have homeopathy show up to that and be a partner in a larger kind of awareness around alternative, what used to be considered maybe more alternative ways of considering health. And
Right.
I think the educational initiatives that you're talking about sound fantastic. Do you find that there's a keen interest in homeopathy emerging in the South?
I think so. I mean, I run with a crowd that is interested in homeopathy. It's interesting because I'm from California originally and spent the first, 40 something years of my life there and then moved here 5 years ago. And so it's definitely a different dynamic, a different demographic. And so I find that more people in Alabama aren't as familiar with homeopathy as they were in California.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's, particularly important for me to to have more education around, exactly what homeopathy is and how it can help and things like that. So generally, I find that people are open-minded about it and curious and want to know more. But I think it's a pretty small percentage
Mm-hmm.
here as compared to elsewhere in the country.
Yeah. And your practice is online or in person or both?
It's online right now. I've had a few people actually ask me if I wanted to share office space with them, but I'm
Hmm.
not ready to do that yet because
Mm-hmm.
I homeschool my oldest child and somebody's got to be home with her.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of out for now. Um, and I just find it more convenient to be online, and it's actually more convenient even if somebody lives in the same town as I am because you don't have to leave your house, you don't have to get
Yeah.
dressed. You don't even have to shower in the evening,
Right.
So I just find
Yeah.
it's very convenient for a lot of people to have it online.
Yeah, yeah. No, I hear you on that count, and that was another thing that was surprising to me too was just discovering how homeopathy is fully functional as an online modality, and it's beautiful to see that is possible.
Yeah,
And
I think a lot of people are surprised about that because they have a misconception of what
yeah,
homeopathy is. Because, we look at our clients, but, we don't examine them or do
mm-hmm,
anything that a doctor does. We're not practicing medicine. So, I think people are surprised, but really, we're recommending remedies based on symptoms, and it's helpful to look at a person's, face or complexion, or if they have issues going on with their skin to see it. But, that's when the camera comes in handy, or I'll
yeah,
ask for pictures of a rash or whatever.
mm-hmm,
So it's just, but then when people start to learn more about what it is, then having an online consultation makes a lot of sense.
yep, yeah. I hear you, and great. Well, I have really appreciated having this time with you today, and I know you're very busy,
Me too.
and so I'm glad to connect, and maybe this can be the kickoff of a fall check-in.
Yes, I would love that.
That would be really nice, actually, and
Yeah. Thank you for
Oh,
asking me to
yeah.
do this. This is
My
really
pleasure.
cool.
Absolutely. Anything else that you'd like to share about where people can find you?
Sure. I am North Star Homeopathy is the name of my practice. It's at northstarhomeopathy.com. And I also have an Instagram account, which is at North Star Homeopathy. So that's me.
Thank you. Yeah, that's great. And I'll put your contact information in the show notes for the podcast as well. So,
Oh, great. Thanks, Roddy.
yeah, well, great to see you today, and
You too.
best of luck with everything. I hope the summer will end at some point down in Huntsville. When I talk to my family, it sounds like it's still strangely hot down
Yeah,
there.
it's
So
hot. It's starting to wind down, but it's like we have these nice cool days, and then the next week it's like 100 degrees and 80% humidity. So
yeah, that shouldn't be happening.
it
That
shouldn't.
shouldn't be. Even for the South, that's too much. Oh
Yeah,
man, yeah.
yeah.
Well, hang in there. So
Yeah, thanks, and good luck to you.